I'm sitting in my parked car in the driveway, and I can't make myself go inside. The windows are fogged up from the heat running, and it's February, cold enough that my breath makes little clouds on the glass. I've been out here for maybe 20 minutes, just staring at the front door of my shotgun house. You know the kind, right? All the rooms lined up in a row like a train car, and at the back there's a porch where I used to sit on summer nights. I'm wearing my cherry red housecoat, the one that used to make me feel alive, and today it just feels like a costume I can't take off. But I need to tell you something I never thought I'd say out loud. Before I go in there, I want you to know, if you're watching this, if you're going through something like what happened to me, this is for you. Please, stay with me. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because what I'm about to share needs to reach someone out there who needs to hear it. It's going to sound unbelievable. But it's true. Every single word. It started with the hospital. I mean, not just the hospital visit itself, but what happened in that room. My husband had taken my mother there. She'd had a fall, broken her hip. I was standing beside her bed, holding her hand, trying to be strong for her. And when I started to say something to the nurse, something about her medication, my husband reached over and put his hand on my mouth. Just covered it, like I was a child. Like my voice didn't matter. My mother saw it. The nurse saw it, and nobody said anything. But that's not even the worst part. The next day, a document showed up. A $120,000 document. And I'm looking at this thing. This legal paper with my name on it. With numbers that don't make sense. With accusations that aren't true. I'm reading it once, twice, 3 times, and I feel my chest tighten because I understand what this is. This is him. This is what he's been doing all along. But now it's official. It's legal. It's real. You see, I'd been married to this man for 16 years. 16 years of listening to gospel music while I cooked, trying to find peace in the rhythm of it, in songs about faith and deliverance. 16 years of believing, truly believing, that God would work it out. That time would heal whatever was broken between us. That if I just stayed faithful, if I just kept quiet, if I just did everything right, everything would be okay. That's what I told myself. Every single day. On the kitchen counter right now, there's a stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band. They've been there for weeks. I know exactly how many there are. 14. 14 bills I haven't opened because I'm too afraid to see the numbers. Too afraid to face what's real. I walk past them every morning, and every morning I tell myself tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll deal with it. Tomorrow I'll be strong enough. But tomorrow never comes when you're living like this. The house feels different now than it did when we first moved here. Back then, the shotgun layout felt cozy, intimate. I loved how you could stand at the front door and see straight through to the back porch. Now it feels like a trap. Like there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to be alone with my thoughts without him appearing in some doorway, watching, listening, controlling. The cold has kept me inside more this winter than usual. The windows fog up from the warmth of the furnace, and sometimes I catch myself just staring at the condensation, tracing patterns with my finger like a child. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet. The church bells ring on Sunday mornings, and I can hear Mrs. Patterson next door calling to her grandkids. Everyone knows everyone here. That used to feel like comfort. Now it feels like surveillance. I need to go back. I need to tell you how this started. Because the hospital wasn't the beginning. That was just the moment I couldn't ignore it anymore. The beginning was years ago, so gradual I didn't even notice. It started with small comments. Observations, he called them, about how I managed money, about how I talked to people, about choices I made. He'd say them with concern in his voice, like he was worried about me, like he was trying to help. And I believed him. I thought he was looking out for me. Then the comments became suggestions. Maybe I shouldn't spend so much time at church events. Maybe I should check with him before making plans. Maybe I should reconsider that friendship because so-and-so wasn't really good for me. And I listened, I changed, I adjusted. I became smaller and smaller and smaller until I fit perfectly into the space he'd created for me. The gospel music was my escape. I'd put on Mahalia Jackson or Aretha Franklin, and I'd cook. Meatloaf, collard greens, cornbread. Food that took time, that required attention, that let me disappear into the rhythm of chopping and stirring and seasoning. With the music playing, I could pretend. I could pretend I was still the woman I used to be, the one who sang along, the one who danced in the kitchen, the one who had dreams bigger than this house, bigger than this life, bigger than the space he'd carved out for me. But even that he took. He'd come into the kitchen and turn the music down. Too loud, he'd say. Or he'd complain about the smell of whatever I was cooking. Or he'd stand in the doorway and just watch me, not saying anything. Just watching until I felt so uncomfortable I'd turn off the music myself. I gave up everything for him. For this marriage. For the idea that if I just loved him enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, it would be enough. I stopped going to my sister's house because he said she put ideas in my head. I stopped volunteering at the church because he said I was neglecting our home. I stopped doing the things that made me feel like myself because he convinced me that being myself was the problem. And the money. God, the money. I worked. I brought income into this house. But somehow I never saw where it went. There was always another bill, another expense, another reason why we couldn't afford the things I wanted. A new dress, a weekend away, even just going to see a movie. Meanwhile, he'd come home talking about the brand new Cadillac Escalade in midnight black that his boss drove. He'd talk about it like it was a dream, something to aspire to, something that represented success and wealth and status. I'd look at that stack of bills on the counter and wonder how we could be so broke when we both worked. I'd wonder where my paychecks went. I'd wonder why I felt like I was drowning in debt I couldn't see. But I didn't ask. Because asking questions made things worse. The neighborhood near the church was my whole world. 3 blocks in any direction, that was my radius. The grocery store, the church, Mrs. Patterson's porch where the older women gathered on warm evenings. I knew everyone. Everyone knew me. And that felt safe, until it didn't. Because he poisoned that too. I started noticing the way people looked at me. The way conversations would stop when I approached. The way invitations dried up. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. I replayed every interaction, every conversation, trying to figure out what I'd said or done to make people turn away from me. It took me months to understand. He was talking about me, spreading stories, lies about my character, my behavior, my stability. He was so careful, so calculated. He'd express concern. He'd say he was worried about me. He'd ask for prayers. And people believed him because why wouldn't they? He was charming. He had a good job. He went to church. He smiled at the right people and said the right things. And me? I was the woman who stayed inside more and more. The woman who looked tired. The woman who seemed disconnected. Of course something must be wrong with me. Of course his concerns must be valid. I remember one Sunday after service, I overheard 2 women talking. They didn't know I was behind them in the fellowship hall. One of them said, "I heard she's been taking money from her mother's account." The other replied, "I'm not surprised. She's always seemed a little off to me." I stood there holding a paper cup of weak coffee, and I felt my whole body go cold. Taking money from my mother, I'd never taken anything from anyone. I'd been supporting my mother financially for years, sending her money for her medications, her bills, her groceries. But the lie was out there. And once a lie is out there, it grows. It mutates. It becomes truth in people's minds because they've heard it enough times. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab those women and shake them and demand to know who told them that. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, while they walked away, their voices fading into the crowd. That night, I confronted him. I asked if he'd been saying things about me. He looked at me with such hurt in his eyes. "How could you even ask me that?" he said. "I'm your husband. I would never do anything to hurt you. You must be imagining things. Maybe you need to talk to someone. Maybe the stress is getting to you." And I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him. Because the alternative, that the man I'd given 16 years of my life to was systematically destroying my reputation, was too painful to accept. So I went to the medicine cabinet and took out that little bottle of anointing oil, the one the pastor had given me years ago. I touched it to my forehead and I prayed. I prayed for clarity. I prayed for strength. I prayed for God to fix whatever was broken in my marriage, in my life, in me. I prayed for time to heal us. I believed that if I just had faith, if I just trusted in divine timing, if I just waited patiently, everything would work itself out. That's what they teach you, right? God will make a way. Be still and know. Wait on the Lord. So I waited. And while I waited, I disappeared a little more each day. The thing about psychological abuse is that it's invisible. There are no bruises to photograph, no broken bones to set, no emergency room visits that create a paper trail. It's just this slow erosion of everything you are until one day you wake up and realize you don't recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. Winter made it worse. The cold kept me inside, trapped in this shotgun house with windows that fogged up from the warmth, and I'd find myself just standing at the glass, looking out at nothing, watching the season pass, watching my life pass. The meatloaf in the fridge was 3 days old. I'd made it on Tuesday, wrapped it in foil the way I always did, thinking maybe he'd eat it for lunch, maybe we'd eat it together for dinner. But he hadn't touched it. He'd been eating out more and more. Working late, he said. Important meetings, business dinners. I'd sit at the kitchen table alone with my plate and that stack of bills held together with a rubber band, and I'd try to remember when things changed. When did I become someone he didn't want to eat dinner with? When did I become someone whose voice needed to be silenced? The answer is, gradually. So gradually I didn't notice until it was too late. Or maybe that's not true. Maybe I noticed. Maybe I just didn't want to see. It was easier to make excuses. He's stressed. Work is hard. Marriage takes work. These are normal challenges. Everyone goes through rough patches. Time will heal this. God will fix this. I just need to be patient. I just need to have faith. I just need to keep trying. So I kept trying. I kept cooking meals he didn't eat. I kept cleaning a house he barely noticed. I kept existing in the margins of a life that was supposed to be ours, but had somehow become only his. And all the while, the lies kept spreading. The rumors kept growing. My reputation kept crumbling. By the time we got to the hospital that day, I was already broken. I just didn't know it yet. The microaggressions had become my normal. The way he'd correct me in front of others. The way he'd answer questions directed at me. The way he'd make decisions without consulting me and then act surprised when I had feelings about it. These weren't occasional incidents. This was daily life. My birthday came and went without acknowledgement. Not a card, not a word, nothing. I'd woken up that morning thinking maybe this year would be different. Maybe he'd surprise me. I'd even put on my cherry red housecoat, the one that used to make me feel special, hoping that putting it on would somehow make the day feel celebratory. But he left for work early without saying anything. And when he came home that night, he didn't mention it. I sat at the kitchen table with that stack of bills and a piece of leftover meatloaf, and I tried not to cry. The next month, I got the flu, really sick. Fever, chills, couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. He'd check on me occasionally, but only to tell me we were out of milk or to ask where his clean shirts were. No offers to make me soup. No concern about whether I needed anything. Just irritation that my being sick was inconvenient for him. On the 3rd day, I dragged myself out of bed to make myself some tea, and I passed by the living room where he was watching TV. He didn't even look up. That's when I saw them. The Christmas cards on the mantel, family photos from his brother's house. Everyone gathered around the tree, smiling, celebrating. And I wasn't in any of them, because we hadn't been invited. Or rather, he'd been invited and I hadn't. And he'd gone without me. I stood there in the doorway, wearing the same cherry red housecoat I'd had on for 3 days, looking at those photos of his family celebrating Christmas, and I realized, I've been erased. Not just from that gathering, from everything, from my own neighborhood, from my own church community, from my own marriage. I was a ghost in my own life. The discovery came in February. That cold, gray February when the windows stayed fogged up and I couldn't see outside clearly anymore. I was sitting in my parked car in the driveway. That's become a habit now, sitting out there before going in, trying to prepare myself for whatever awaits inside. When a woman knocked on my window. I didn't know her. She was maybe in her 50s, wearing a professional pantsuit and carrying a folder. She introduced herself as Rachel, a social worker from an advocacy office downtown. She said she needed to talk to me, that it was urgent. I invited her inside because what else do you do when a stranger shows up at your car and says she needs to talk to you urgently? We sat in the living room, the same room where those Christmas cards still sat on the mantel, and she opened her folder. The first thing she pulled out was a photograph. An old photograph, maybe 15 years old, and it was me. I was wearing a different dress, something bright and patterned. My hair was different, longer, fuller. But it was my face that stopped me. My smile. It was real. Not the tight, careful smile I'd learned to wear, but an open, genuine, joyful smile. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep inside, from a place of actual happiness. I stared at that photograph, and I didn't recognize myself. Not because the image was old or faded, but because I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt whatever I was feeling in that picture. When did I stop smiling like that? When did that woman disappear? Rachel watched me, and I could see in her eyes that she understood what I was feeling. That she'd seen this before. That I wasn't the first woman to sit in her living room and stare at an old photograph of herself and wonder who that person was. Then she told me things I wasn't ready to hear. She told me about the document, the $120,000 document that would show up the next day. She told me my husband had been forging financial records, creating a paper trail that made it look like I'd been stealing money from my mother's accounts, from our joint accounts, from his business. He'd been methodical, careful, building a case against me that would stand up legally. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was why. He was preparing for divorce. Not just any divorce, but one where he'd come out looking like the victim, where he'd get everything. The house, the savings, the sympathy. And I'd get nothing but a ruined reputation and crushing debt. All those lies he'd been spreading? They were preparation, laying groundwork, making sure that when the time came, everyone would believe his version of events. That I was unstable, untrustworthy, possibly mentally ill. That he'd tried everything to help me. That he'd been patient and long-suffering. That he'd finally had no choice but to protect himself. I remember sitting there listening to Rachel explain all this and feeling this weird disconnect. Like she was talking about someone else's life, someone else's husband. Because surely my husband, the man I'd been married to for 16 years, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, wouldn't do this to me. But then she showed me more documents, bank statements, legal filings, communications between him and his lawyer, and I couldn't deny it anymore. This was real. This was happening. This had been happening for months, maybe years, while I'd been sitting in this house, wearing my cherry red housecoat, listening to gospel music and praying for God to fix my marriage. Rachel asked me, "How did you feel yesterday at the hospital?" And that's when everything connected. The hospital. My mother's broken hip, standing beside her bed, trying to advocate for her care. And my husband putting his hand over my mouth, silencing me, in front of my mother, in front of the nurse. Like my voice, my concerns, my presence didn't matter. That wasn't a moment of frustration or stress. That was practice. He'd been practicing silencing me for so long that doing it publicly, in front of witnesses, felt natural to him. I looked down at that photograph of younger me, the one with the real smile, and something inside me just broke open. I started crying. Not quiet tears. Deep, body-shaking sobs. The kind of crying you do when you realize you've been betrayed so completely, so thoroughly, that you don't know if you'll ever trust anything or anyone again. I cried for that woman in the photograph. I cried for all the years I'd lost. I cried for my voice, my time, my faith that had been weaponized against me.
I cried for the life I'd thought I was living that turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. Rachel sat with me. She didn't try to stop me or comfort me with empty platitudes. She just sat there and let me break apart because she knew I needed to. When I finally stopped, when I'd cried myself into exhausted silence, she asked me a question that changed everything. She said, "Do you want to fix this?" And I realized that for the first time in 16 years, the answer was entirely up to me. Not God, not time, not faith or patience or hope. Me. I could choose to keep waiting, keep praying, keep believing that somehow this would work itself out, or I could choose to fight back. I looked at that stack of bills on the kitchen table, held together with a rubber band. 14 bills I'd been too afraid to open. 14 pieces of evidence of a life I'd been too afraid to examine. I walked over and picked them up. My hands were shaking, and one by one, I opened them. They weren't what I expected. They were statements from accounts I didn't know existed. Credit cards in my name that I'd never opened. Loans I'd never signed for. Thousands and thousands of dollars of debt that I hadn't created but was somehow responsible for. This is what Rachel had come to tell me. This is what she'd discovered through her work at the advocacy office. Someone, another woman going through something similar, had mentioned my name, had said she'd heard things about me around the neighborhood, and Rachel had decided to investigate. She'd found the paper trail my husband had been building, and she'd found the truth underneath the lies. I asked her, why would he do this? After everything I gave him, after all these years, why? She didn't have an answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe trying to understand the why keeps you trapped in the cycle, searching for reasons that would make sense of senseless cruelty. What she did say was this: you don't have to wait for God to fix this. You can fix it yourself. And that felt like permission. Permission to stop being passive. Permission to stop making excuses. Permission to stop believing that suffering in silence was somehow noble or faithful or right. That night, after Rachel left, I sat in my kitchen with all those opened bills spread out in front of me, and I made a decision. I called a lawyer. His name was Marcus, and Rachel had recommended him. He specialized in cases like mine: financial abuse, reputation destruction, divorce with intent to defraud. He asked me to gather everything I could find, every document, every bill, every piece of communication, anything that might help build my case. I spent the next 3 days going through everything: the house, the files, the boxes in the back closet. I found years of evidence I'd been too afraid to look at. Bank statements showing transfers I never authorized. Emails between him and people I'd never heard of. Legal documents with forged signatures. And I found something else. A notebook. His notebook, hidden in the back of his desk drawer. It was filled with notes, plans, calculations about assets and net worth, and how to structure things so that I'd come out with nothing. He'd been planning this for at least 2 years, maybe longer. There was even a date circled, 6 months from now. That's when he was planning to file for divorce. That's when all of this would have come to fruition. I read through that notebook sitting on the floor of his office, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean, clarifying anger. Not the confused sadness I'd been living with. Not the self-doubt or the wondering if maybe I was the problem, but actual anger at what had been done to me, at the betrayal, at the calculated cruelty. That anger gave me strength. When my husband came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room. The notebook was on the coffee table. The opened bills were there too. And Rachel's card. He saw them and his face changed. Just for a second. just long enough for me to see that he knew exactly what I'd found. Then he rearranged his expression, put on that concerned look, that patient, long-suffering husband look. He asked me what was wrong. Why was I going through his things? Was I feeling okay? Maybe I should sit down. Maybe I was having another episode. Another episode. Like I was the one who was unstable. Like I was the one creating problems. I said 3 words. They came out calm and clear and certain. I said, "I know everything." He started to respond, started to spin some explanation, but I held up my hand, just like he'd done to me in the hospital, and I told him to be quiet. I told him I'd hired a lawyer. I told him I had copies of everything. I told him that Rachel had already filed a report with the appropriate authorities about the forged documents and the financial fraud. I told him it was over. He tried everything then. First anger, accusing me of being paranoid, of ruining our marriage, of listening to strangers instead of trusting him. Then desperation, begging me to reconsider, saying we could work it out, that he'd made mistakes but he loved me. Then threats, warning me that I'd regret this, that I'd lose everything, that no one would believe me over him. But I didn't move. I didn't waver. I didn't back down, because for the first time in 16 years, I was completely clear about what was true and what was a lie. The next morning, the $120,000 document appeared, just like Rachel had said it would. A legal filing claiming I'd defrauded him and my mother, demanding restitution, painting me as a criminal. But I was ready for it. Marcus was ready for it. We filed a counterclaim immediately, along with all the evidence we'd gathered, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the notebook with his plans, everything. The battle had begun. My husband didn't take it well. He'd been so confident that his plan was foolproof, that he'd covered all his bases, that I'd never figure it out, and even if I did, I wouldn't have the strength to fight back. But he'd underestimated one thing. He'd underestimated what happens when you back someone into a corner with nothing left to lose. The first confrontation happened at his brother's house. It was a Sunday dinner, and normally I wouldn't have been invited. But Marcus had advised me to go, to face them, to make my presence known and my position clear. So I went. I walked into that house wearing my cherry red housecoat because I wanted to feel alive, wanted to remind myself of who I used to be. And I walked into a room full of his family members who'd been hearing his version of events for months. They stared at me like I was the villain, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. His mother actually gasped when she saw me, as if my mere presence was offensive. His brother's wife literally got up and left the room. But I stayed. I sat down at that table and I waited for someone to say something. Finally, my husband spoke. He said, "I don't think you should be here." I looked directly at him and said, "I have every right to be here. I'm still your wife, and I'm not going anywhere until everyone in this room hears the truth." He tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. I told them about the forged documents, about the hidden accounts, about the money he'd been stealing and the lies he'd been spreading. I told them about Rachel and the social worker's investigation. I told them about Marcus and the legal action we were taking. His family didn't want to believe me. Of course they didn't. He was their son, their brother, their nephew. I was just the woman he'd married who they'd never really known. But I'd brought documents. I'd brought proof. I'd brought Rachel's card and Marcus's business card and bank statements, and that notebook with its circled date. I spread them out on their dining room table, right next to the Sunday roast and the mashed potatoes, and I said, "You can believe whatever you want, but these are facts." His mother started crying. His brother got angry, said I was lying, said I was trying to destroy their family. His sister-in-law, the one who'd left the room, came back and said I should be ashamed of myself. But I noticed something. His father didn't say anything. He just looked at those documents. Then he looked at his son, and something passed between them. Some understanding, some recognition. Later, I'd learned that his father had suspected something was wrong, had noticed inconsistencies in stories, had wondered about the sudden wealth his son seemed to have despite claiming money troubles. But in that moment, in that dining room, nothing was resolved. His family closed ranks. They chose to believe him because the alternative was too uncomfortable. I left that house knowing I'd done what I needed to do. I'd told the truth. What they chose to do with it was their decision. But the confrontation wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, he tried everything to break me down. He'd show up at the house at odd hours, sometimes in that brand new Cadillac Escalade in midnight black. He'd bought it, the dream car he'd always talked about, bought it with money he'd stolen. He'd park it in the driveway like a taunt, like a reminder of his success and my supposed failure. He'd call my phone at 2 a.m. He'd send long text messages switching between apologies and accusations. He'd contact people we both knew, trying to get them to intervene, to convince me I was making a mistake. But I'd changed. The woman who would have crumbled under that pressure, who would have doubted herself, who would have apologized just to make peace. She was gone. Instead, I documented everything. Every call, every text, every violation of the no-contact order Marcus had helped me file. Every piece of evidence that proved he was exactly who I now knew him to be. I started going to therapy, not because I was broken or unstable like he'd been claiming, but because I needed help processing 16 years of manipulation and abuse. I needed professional support to rebuild my sense of self. The therapist helped me understand something crucial, that what I'd experienced was real, that I wasn't imagining it, that gaslighting is real and effective and can make you doubt your own memory and perception. She also helped me understand that healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd feel strong and clear, and other days I'd still wonder if maybe I was wrong, if maybe I'd overreacted, if maybe I should have tried harder to make it work. Those were the hardest days, the days when doubt crept back in. But then I'd look at that photograph, the one Rachel had brought, the one of younger me with the real smile, and I'd remember, I'm fighting to get back to her. The legal process moved slowly. Marcus warned me it would.
Financial fraud cases are complicated. Proving forgery takes time. Building an ironclad case requires patience and precision. But while we waited for the legal system to work, I took control of what I could control. I opened my own bank account. I changed all my passwords. I got a P.O. box so my mail couldn't be intercepted. I installed security cameras around the house. I made copies of everything important and stored them with Rachel's office. And I did something I'd wanted to do for years but had been too afraid to try. I took the bus somewhere new just to see it. Not far. Just downtown Brooklyn. But it was somewhere I'd never been alone. Somewhere I'd never explored. Somewhere that existed outside the 3-block radius that had been my entire world. I got on that bus wearing my cherry red housecoat under a coat, and I rode it all the way to the end of the line. Then I got off, and I walked around. I looked in shop windows. I sat in a coffee shop and drank overpriced coffee. I watched people living their lives, going about their days, free and unencumbered. And I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope I'd been clinging to for years. Not the hope that things would magically get better if I just waited long enough. But real hope. Hope based on action. Hope based on choosing myself. Hope based on the understanding that I could actually change my own circumstances. That bus ride became a ritual. Once a week, sometimes more, I'd take the bus somewhere new. I'd explore a different neighborhood. I'd sit in a different coffee shop. I'd remind myself that the world was bigger than my suffering, that life existed beyond the walls of that shotgun house. Rachel became more than just a social worker who'd knocked on my car window. She became a friend, an advocate, someone who checked in regularly to make sure I was okay. who reminded me that what I was doing was brave, who connected me with other women who'd been through similar situations. Through Rachel, I learned I wasn't alone, that there were so many of us. Women who'd given everything to marriages that had slowly consumed them. Women who'd been gaslit and manipulated and financially abused. Women who'd had their reputations destroyed by men who were supposed to love them. We'd meet sometimes, this informal group of survivors. We'd share our stories. We'd cry together. We'd celebrate small victories. We'd remind each other that healing was possible. And through those women, I learned something else. I learned about the prevalence of abuse in our community. I learned statistics I'd never known before. I learned that the problem was so much bigger than just my story. But my story wasn't finished yet. The second twist came 6 months after Rachel's first visit, right when I was starting to feel stable, right when I was starting to believe I might actually be okay. I got a call from my mother's nursing home. The administrator needed to see me immediately. There was a problem with her account, irregularities, missing funds. My first thought was that my husband had somehow managed to steal from her even though I'd changed everything, locked down all her accounts, moved her to a new facility. But it was worse than that. The administrator showed me the records. The transfers had my signature, my authorization, my account information. He'd done it, even after everything, even after I'd thought I'd protected her. He'd found a way to frame me for stealing from my own mother. This was his final blow, his last attempt to destroy me completely. Because he knew that if I was convicted of elder financial abuse, I'd lose everything, not just wealth or reputation, but my freedom. I sat in that administrator's office and I felt the walls closing in. This was what he'd been planning all along. This was his backup plan. Even if the other charges didn't stick, this one would. Because it looked so convincing. Because the evidence seemed so clear. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. The administrator said, "But we know it wasn't you." I looked up at her, confused. How could they know? She explained that they'd recently installed new security protocols, video surveillance in the offices, time-stamped access logs, and the person who'd made those transfers wasn't me. It was my husband. He'd somehow gotten my credentials and accessed the system remotely. They had proof, clear, undeniable proof that he'd committed fraud, that he'd forged my authorization, that he'd stolen from a vulnerable elderly person. The administrator had already reported it to the authorities. He was being investigated, and this time, there was no ambiguity. No he said, she said. Just facts. I asked why she'd called me in if she knew I wasn't responsible. She said, "Because I wanted you to know that we believe you, that we see what he tried to do, and that we're not going to let him get away with it." I cried, right there in her office. But these weren't tears of despair. These were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being believed. The investigation moved quickly after that. With the nursing home's evidence added to everything Marcus had already compiled, the case against my husband became overwhelming. He lost his job. The company couldn't keep someone on staff who was under investigation for fraud and elder abuse. His professional license was suspended pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. His reputation, the one he'd worked so carefully to build while destroying mine, crumbled. The neighborhood near the church started talking. But this time, they were talking about him, about what he'd done, about how they'd believed his lies. Some people apologized to me. Others couldn't look me in the eye. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired and relieved and ready for it all to be over. The settlement came through 8 months after Rachel's first visit. My husband agreed to everything. He had no choice. The evidence was too damning. He returned the money he'd stolen. He signed over his share of the house. He paid my legal fees. And he accepted a restraining order that would keep him away from me for years. Marcus said it was one of the most clear-cut cases he'd ever handled, that my husband had been so confident in his plan that he'd left a trail a mile wide. that his arrogance had been his downfall. I moved 6 months after the settlement was finalized. Not far. Just to a small apartment in the city where there was always something to do, always people around, always life happening. The shotgun house sold quickly. Someone else would live in those rooms lined up in a row. Someone else would sit on that back porch. Someone else would watch the windows fog up in winter. I took almost nothing with me, just my clothes. That photograph Rachel had given me and the bottle of anointing oil from the medicine cabinet. Everything else was just stuff, just reminders of a life I didn't want to remember. The apartment is different, smaller, brighter. It has big windows that let in light. It's on the 3rd floor so I can see the street. There's a coffee shop downstairs and a library around the corner, and the bus stop is right outside. I spend my mornings there now, at that coffee shop. I've gotten to know the baristas. They know my order. They ask how I'm doing, and they actually listen to the answer. I started volunteering with Rachel's organization, helping other women who are going through what I went through, sharing my story, offering resources, just being present for someone who needs to know they're not alone. And I've been working on my faith. Not the faith that says wait and pray and God will fix it, but a deeper faith. One that says God gave me strength and wisdom and agency for a reason. That sometimes the miracle isn't external intervention. Sometimes the miracle is finding the courage to save yourself. I keep that bottle of anointing oil on my bathroom counter now, and when I use it, it's not about waiting for something to happen. It's about acknowledging my own healing, about recognizing my own power, about anointing myself as worthy of love and respect and peace. The cherry red housecoat hangs in my closet. I wear it sometimes on lazy Sunday mornings when I'm making breakfast just for myself. And when I wear it now, it does make me feel alive. Because I am alive. Really alive. Not just existing, not just surviving, but actually living. I see my mother twice a week. She's doing better in the new facility. Her hip healed. And more importantly, she's safe. Her money is safe. And she knows what her son-in-law tried to do. She knows I protected her. That knowledge, that vindication, matters more to me than any settlement check. Sometimes I think about my husband, about whether he's changed, about whether he regrets what he did, about whether he's learned anything from losing everything. But honestly, I don't think about him much anymore. He doesn't deserve the space in my mind. He doesn't get to occupy my thoughts or influence my emotions or affect my peace. That's the real liberation, not the legal victory or the financial settlement or the moving away. It's the mental freedom. It's reclaiming my own mind, my own narrative, my own sense of self. Last week, I was riding the bus, still doing that, still exploring, still reminding myself the world is big and full of possibilities. And I caught my reflection in the window. I was smiling. Not the tight, careful smile I'd worn for so long, but a real smile, an open, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside. And I thought, there she is, the woman from that photograph. She's back. It's been almost 2 years since Rachel knocked on my car window. 2 years since I opened those bills. 2 years since I decided to fight back. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I'm bitter, if I resent the years I lost. The truth is complicated. Yes, I'm angry about what was done to me. I'm angry about the lies and the manipulation and the calculated cruelty. I'm angry that I believed for so long that I was the problem. But I'm not bitter. Because bitterness is just anger that's gone stale. And I won't let what he did to me poison who I'm becoming. As for the lost years, I've learned something about that too. They weren't lost. They were hard. They were painful. They taught me things I wish I didn't have to learn. But they also taught me my own strength, my own resilience, my own capacity to survive and rebuild and become someone new. So no, I don't resent those years. I just refuse to lose any more of them. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. Because if you're listening to this story, if you've made it this far, maybe you need to hear it. When I started working with Rachel's organization, I learned things about abuse that shocked me. Statistics that I wish weren't true but are. I learned that a 2012 study revealed that 1 in 4 nursing home residents suffered physical abuse. 1 in 4. That's 25% of our most vulnerable population being hurt by the people who are supposed to care for them. And I learned that studies show that domestic violence may be the biggest risk factor for child abuse. That when there's abuse in a home, when there's control and manipulation and cruelty, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It affects everyone, especially the most vulnerable. These statistics matter because they show that what happened to me, what almost happened to my mother, isn't rare. It's not isolated. It's not just bad luck or one bad person. It's systemic. It's widespread. And it's often invisible until it's almost too late. I think about how close I came to never escaping. How if Rachel hadn't shown up that day, if she hadn't knocked on my car window, if she hadn't decided to investigate based on rumors she'd heard, I might still be sitting in that shotgun house, wearing my cherry red housecoat, waiting for God to fix what only I could fix. And I think about all the women and men who are sitting in their cars right now, who are too afraid to go inside, who are making excuses, who are praying for change that isn't coming because prayer without action is just hope without power. If that's you, I need you to hear this. You don't have to wait. You don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to believe the lies about yourself. You deserve better. You deserve safety and respect and peace. You deserve to be the person in that old photograph, the one with the real smile. And you can be. But you have to choose it. You have to take the first step. Even if it's scary. Even if you don't know what comes next. Even if everyone around you tells you you're wrong. Because here's what I learned. The system often fails us. The people who are supposed to help sometimes don't. The authorities who should intervene sometimes look the other way. But there are Rachels out there. There are Marcuses. There are social workers and lawyers and advocates and organizations that exist specifically to help people like us. You just have to reach out. You just have to ask for help. You just have to believe that you're worth saving. Document everything. Save everything. Every text, every email, every bill, every strange transaction. Create a paper trail because that paper trail might be what saves you. Get your own bank account. Change your passwords. Find people you can trust and tell them what's happening. Don't suffer alone. Don't hide the truth because you're ashamed or afraid or convinced it's somehow your fault. And if the first person you reach out to doesn't help, reach out to someone else. Keep trying. Keep fighting. Keep believing that freedom is possible because it is. I'm living proof that you can escape, that you can rebuild, that you can become yourself again. It won't be easy. There will be days when you want to give up, days when the doubt creeps back in, days when you question whether it was worth it. But I promise you, it is worth it. Every hard day, every difficult moment, every time you have to stand firm when you want to crumble, it's worth it. Because on the other side of all that pain is peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you chose yourself. That you refused to accept a life of cruelty and control. That you found the strength to save yourself. And that peace, that freedom, that joy of being fully yourself, nothing compares to it. Nothing. The gospel music I used to listen to while I cooked, trying to find comfort in songs about deliverance, I still listen to it. But now I understand the songs differently. They're not about waiting for God to deliver you. They're about recognizing that God already gave you everything you need to deliver yourself. The strength, the wisdom, the courage. It's already inside you. You just have to access it. That bottle of anointing oil, I use it differently now. It's not a plea for intervention. It's a celebration of transformation. It's anointing myself as enough, as worthy, as sacred. My apartment isn't fancy. It's small and the heat sometimes doesn't work great and I can hear my neighbors through the walls, but it's mine. Mine in a way that shotgun house never was. Because I chose this space. I created this life. I'm not waiting for someone else's permission to exist. I've started doing my hobby again. I'd given it up years ago because there was never time, never energy, never space for things that were just for me. But now I make time. I make space. Because I matter. My joy matters. My interests matter. And you know what? I'm learning that I actually like myself. Not the version of myself I was performing for 16 years. Not the small, quiet, careful version. But the real me. The one who has opinions and boundaries and dreams. The one who takes up space. The one who smiles, real smiles. I'm learning that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. That I can enjoy my own company. That I can sit in comfortable silence without it being heavy with tension and unspoken resentments. I'm learning that not everyone will understand my choices. That some people will think I gave up too easily. That others will judge me for staying as long as I did. And I'm learning that their opinions don't matter. Only mine does. I'm learning that healing isn't linear. That some days I'm strong and clear. And other days I still feel the weight of all those years. That both can be true. That I can be healing and still have hard days. I'm learning that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you create for yourself. By choosing to move forward. By refusing to stay stuck. By writing a new story. And that's what this is. A new story. Not the one he wrote about me. Not the one I was living in that shotgun house. But a new one. One where I'm the author. Where I decide what happens next. Where I choose the ending. The photograph Rachel brought me that day? I have it framed now. It sits on my nightstand. And every morning when I wake up, it's the first thing I see. That reminder of who I was. Who I'm becoming again. Who I've always been underneath all the pain and fear and doubt. Sometimes I look at it and I apologize to her. To that woman with the real smile. I apologize for losing her. For letting her disappear. For not fighting for her sooner. And then I make her a promise. I promise her that I'll never let anyone silence her again. That I'll never shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. That I'll protect her fierceness and her joy and her voice. That's the real justice. Not what happened to my husband legally. Not the settlement or the restraining order or his destroyed reputation. The real justice is me reclaiming myself. Me becoming whole again. Me refusing to let his cruelty define the rest of my life. So if you're sitting in your car right now, afraid to go inside, if you're looking at your own stack of unpaid bills, wondering how you got here, if you're wearing something that used to make you feel alive but now just feels like a costume, if you're listening to this and seeing yourself in my story, I need you to know, this doesn't have to be your ending. You can rewrite it. You can choose differently. You can save yourself. It won't be easy. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. But you can do it. I know you can, because I did. And I never thought I was strong enough. I never thought I was brave enough. I never thought I deserved better. But I did. And I do. And so do you. So make the call. Reach out to someone. Document what's happening. Start building your case. Take that first small step toward freedom. And know that on the other side, there's a life waiting for you. A real life. One where you matter. Where your voice is heard. Where you can wear your cherry red housecoat and feel truly alive. One where you can look in the mirror and recognize yourself. One where you can smile real smiles. One where you can take the bus somewhere new just because you want to see it. That life is possible. That life is waiting. You just have to choose it. And if you're struggling to choose it, if you're still afraid, if you still doubt whether you can really do this, remember, you're not alone. There are Rachels and Marcuses and organizations and resources and other survivors who will help you. You don't have to do this alone. You just have to take the first step. So take it. Today. Right now. Before the fear convinces you to wait another day, another week, another year. Because you've already waited long enough. You've already suffered enough. You've already given enough. Now it's time to choose yourself, to save yourself, to become yourself again. The woman in that old photograph is still in there. She's still waiting, still hoping, still believing that someday you'll come back for her. So go get her. Fight for her. Reclaim her. She's worth it. You're worth it. And your story doesn't have to end the way he wrote it. You can write a new ending, starting today. Have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? If this story resonated with you, if you see yourself or someone you love in these words, leave a comment, share your experience. You never know who needs to hear that they're not alone. And please, hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, but for the next person who needs this message. For the woman sitting in her car. For the man making excuses. For anyone who's waiting for God to fix what only they can fix. Let's make sure this story reaches the people who need it most. Because we all deserve to smile real smiles. We all deserve to feel truly alive. We all deserve freedom. And we all deserve to come home to ourselves.